The jackhammer started at 6:47 a.m. on a Tuesday morning, and Rebecca Torres knew exactly what was coming. The 42-year-old civil engineer stood in her backyard, safety goggles on, watching the pool demolition crew break through the concrete deck she'd spent 3 summers enjoying. Across the fence, she could already see movement in Linda Whitmore's kitchen window. The telltale flutter of curtains, the shadow of a woman who'd made Rebecca's life miserable for 8 months. 8 months of complaints about pool noise. 8 months of demands that Rebecca maintain her view of the water. 8 months of threats, HOA violations that went nowhere, and finally, 2 weeks ago, Linda's shrieking declaration that Rebecca was destroying property values by draining her pool for demolition. But today, Rebecca wasn't backing down. Today, with permits in hand and a demolition crew she'd paid $8,000 to hire, Rebecca was taking back her property. And what Linda didn't know was that her next move, the one Rebecca had predicted and prepared for, was about to make her the laughingstock of their entire neighborhood. Before we dive into how Rebecca turned Linda's entitlement into the most embarrassing day of her life, if you love stories where Karens finally face consequences and property rights win, hit that like button and subscribe. Now, let's see exactly how this unfolded. This is a story in 3 parts. The violation that pushed a reasonable woman past her breaking point. The confrontation where emergency services became unwilling participants in a Karen's downfall. And the resolution where an entire neighborhood learned what happens when you push the wrong person. For 8 months, Rebecca endured Linda Whitmore's escalating demands over a pool that wasn't hers. What started as polite requests became threatening letters, HOA complaints, and finally, claims of ownership over Rebecca's property. The breaking point came when Linda declared Rebecca couldn't drain her own pool, couldn't make her own property decisions, couldn't exist in her own home without permission. Rebecca tried everything legal and reasonable. She tried patience. She tried documentation. She tried ignoring it. Nothing worked. Until Rebecca realized that sometimes the best response to entitlement is to let it destroy itself on camera. The confrontation came on demolition day. When Linda did exactly what Rebecca predicted, she called 911 claiming emergency criminal activity. But Linda made 3 critical mistakes. She lied to emergency dispatchers. She harassed officers performing their duty. And she did it all in front of a woman who'd spent 2 months documenting everything, consulting with a real estate attorney, and preparing for this exact moment. The power shift wasn't gradual, it was instantaneous, brutal, and recorded from 4 different angles. The resolution brought consequences Linda never imagined. What she thought would be Rebecca's arrest became her own citation. What she thought would be neighborhood support became neighborhood testimony against her. What she thought would be vindication became evidence in multiple legal actions. And in the end, Linda learned that when you weaponize emergency services against your neighbors, karma doesn't just visit, it moves in permanently. Here's exactly how it happened. Rebecca Torres had bought the house at 2847 Meadowbrook Lane 3 years ago specifically for the pool. As a civil engineer specializing in water treatment facilities, she'd fallen in love with the pristine 20 by 40-foot saltwater pool the moment she saw it. The previous owners had maintained it beautifully, and Rebecca continued that tradition, spending summer evenings swimming laps after long days managing municipal infrastructure projects. She was methodical, quiet, and kept to herself, the kind of neighbor who waved politely and maintained her property without fanfare. The house next door had been empty for 4 months when Linda Whitmore moved in, and Rebecca remembered thinking how nice it would be to finally have a neighbor again. That optimism lasted exactly 2 weeks. The first incident happened on a Saturday morning in June. Rebecca was vacuuming the pool, a routine task she performed every weekend around 9 a.m., late enough to be respectful, early enough to finish before the afternoon heat became unbearable. She heard her doorbell ring and found Linda standing there, smile tight and artificial. "Hi, neighbor. I was wondering if you could do your pool maintenance a little later. I like to have my coffee on the back deck, and the noise is just a bit much." Rebecca, always accommodating, agreed to start at 10 a.m. instead. Linda's smile widened. "Actually, noon would be better. I do yoga until 11. Rebecca hesitated but nodded. It seemed like a reasonable request from a new neighbor trying to settle in. She didn't realize she'd just established a pattern Linda would exploit mercilessly. 3 weeks later, the demands escalated. Linda appeared at Rebecca's door on a Wednesday evening, this time without the fake smile. "Your pool filter is too loud at night. I can hear it from my bedroom, and I'm a very light sleeper. You need to turn it off after 8 p.m. Rebecca explained that pool filters needed to run continuously to maintain water chemistry and prevent algae growth, basic pool ownership that Linda should understand. Linda's eyes narrowed. "I don't care about your pool chemistry. I care about my sleep. Figure it out, or I'll file a noise complaint with the HOA. Rebecca, stunned by the hostility, researched quieter pool pumps and spent $1,200 on a variable speed model that reduced noise by 60%. She installed it herself, hoping that would satisfy Linda. It didn't. Linda complained the new pump was still too loud, demanded Rebecca install additional soundproofing, and began sending daily text messages about various pool-related violations of her peace and quiet. By August, Linda's entitlement had evolved into something darker. She claimed Rebecca's pool was ruining her property value because potential buyers could see the pool maintenance equipment from her yard. She demanded Rebecca build a privacy fence, on Rebecca's dime, to block Linda's view of Rebecca's own property. When Rebecca refused, Linda filed 4 separate HOA complaints in 2 weeks, claiming everything from unsightly pool toys, a single floating thermometer, to excessive water usage — Rebecca's pool evaporation was normal — to improper chemical storage. Rebecca's locked pool supply cabinet met all local codes. The HOA president, Jim Caldwell, called Rebecca personally to apologize. Linda's filed 23 complaints against various neighbors in 3 months. "Nobody takes her seriously anymore, but legally I have to document them. Just keep doing what you're doing." Rebecca thanked him, but the stress was mounting. She'd stopped using her pool entirely, afraid any activity would trigger another complaint, another confrontation, another escalation. The breaking point came in October. Rebecca's pool had developed a crack in the liner over the summer, and after consulting with 3 pool companies, she made the difficult decision to demolish and fill it in, rather than spend $15,000 on repairs for a pool she no longer enjoyed using. The decision was financial and emotional. Linda had successfully stolen the joy from the one feature Rebecca had bought the house for. Rebecca pulled permits, hired a demolition company, and scheduled the work for early November. She even informed the HOA president as a courtesy, though it wasn't required. What she didn't do was tell Linda, because she didn't owe Linda any explanations about her own property. That omission would prove strategic. Rebecca spent the next 2 weeks preparing meticulously. As a civil engineer, she understood documentation and legal liability. She installed 2 additional security cameras covering her backyard and the property line. She reviewed all her previous text exchanges with Linda. She consulted with her real estate attorney, Marcus Webb, who listened to her story and gave her specific advice. "Linda's going to escalate when you start demolition. Document everything. Don't engage. Let her overplay her hand." Rebecca also did something else, something that would prove crucial. She contacted the non-emergency police line and informed them she was scheduling major construction, that a neighbor had a history of harassment, and that false emergency calls were possible. The dispatcher made a note in the system. Rebecca marked November 7th on her calendar. Demolition day. She was done being a victim. Done accommodating crazy. Done pretending that being nice would fix anything. If Linda wanted to play games with someone who built water treatment systems for entire cities, who understood civil engineering law better than most attorneys, who had spent 2 months preparing for every possible escalation, then Rebecca would show her what games really looked like. And on November 7th at 6:47 a.m., when that jackhammer fired up, everything was finally ready. The demolition crew had been working for exactly 43 minutes when Rebecca saw Linda burst through her back door like a woman possessed. It was 7:30 a.m. and Rebecca was standing near her back fence, hard hat on, reviewing the crew's progress on breaking up the pool deck. She watched Linda storm across her own yard in pajamas and a bathrobe, iPhone clutched in her hand, face twisted with rage. Rebecca didn't move. She'd been waiting for this moment, had predicted it down to the morning timing. Linda reached the fence line and screamed over the jackhammer noise. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" Rebecca calmly signaled to the crew supervisor, who stopped his workers. In the sudden silence, Rebecca's voice was quiet, but clear. "I'm demolishing my pool on my property with proper permits." "Good morning, Linda." Linda's face went purple. "You can't do this. You can't just destroy a pool. That pool is part of this neighborhood's character. You're destroying property values." Rebecca pulled out her phone and began recording. "Linda, this is my property. I have permits. This is legal construction. Please return to your home." That's when Linda made her first critical mistake. She looked directly at Rebecca's camera and snarled, "I'm calling 911. You're destroying property and I'm reporting criminal activity." Rebecca had expected anger. She'd expected complaints. But she hadn't quite expected Linda to be stupid enough to weaponize emergency services on camera. "Linda, calling 911 for legal construction is filing a false report. I'm asking you one more time to return to your home." Linda was already dialing, phone pressed to her ear. Rebecca kept recording as Linda spoke to the dispatcher, her voice taking on a panicked, theatrical quality. "Yes, I need police immediately. My neighbor is destroying property with heavy equipment. There's criminal activity happening right now at 2847 Meadowbrook Lane. She's destroying a pool without permission. You need to send officers immediately." Rebecca caught every word on camera. The dispatcher asked follow-up questions. Linda lied repeatedly, claiming Rebecca was destroying shared property, that there was no permit, that Rebecca was threatening her. Each lie was documented from multiple angles: Rebecca's phone, her security cameras, and the demolition crew's site cameras. 20 minutes later, 2 police cruisers pulled up. Officers Ryan Mitchell and Jennifer Park stepped out, and Rebecca walked calmly to her front driveway to meet them. Linda was right behind her, still in her bathrobe, practically vibrating with vindication. "Officers, thank God! She's destroying property! Arrest her!" Officer Mitchell held up his hand. "Ma'am, step back, please. We'll handle this." He turned to Rebecca. "I'm Officer Mitchell. You're Rebecca Torres?" Rebecca nodded. "Yes, officer. Thank you for responding. I believe you'll find a note in your system. I called the non-emergency line 2 weeks ago about potential false reports from this neighbor regarding my scheduled, permitted pool demolition." Officer Park checked her mobile terminal and nodded to her partner. Mitchell's expression shifted from neutral to annoyed. "Ms. Torres, can you show us your permits?" Rebecca handed him a folder. Permits, property survey, HOA approval documentation, contractor licenses, insurance certificates. Everything organized with engineering precision. Mitchell reviewed them, showed them to Park, and both officers nodded. Mitchell turned to Linda. "Ma'am, these permits are valid. This is legal construction on private property. Why exactly did you call 911? Linda's certainty began to crack. She can't just destroy a pool. That's not, it affects my property value. I have rights." Officer Park stepped forward, her voice professional but cold. "Ma'am, what's your name?" Linda drew herself up. "Linda Whitmore. I live next door, and I'm telling you this woman is—" Park cut her off. "Ms. Whitmore, did you tell the 911 dispatcher that this was criminal activity?" Linda hesitated. "Well, it is." "She's destroying—" Mitchell interrupted. "It's not. It's legal construction. Did you tell the dispatcher there was no permit?" Linda's face went pale. I assumed there wasn't—" Park pulled out her own phone. "Ms. Whitmore, we recorded your 911 call. You stated definitively that there was no permit, that this was criminal destruction, and that Ms. Torres was threatening you. Are any of those statements true?" The silence stretched. Linda looked between the officers and Rebecca, realization finally dawning that she'd miscalculated catastrophically. She should have told me." "I have a right to know what's happening next door." Rebecca finally spoke, her voice calm and factual. "Linda, you've filed 27 HOA complaints against me in 8 months. You've demanded I turn off essential pool equipment. You've texted me 183 times with demands, complaints, and threats. You've claimed ownership rights over my property repeatedly. I have every message, every complaint, every interaction documented. I consulted with both my attorney and your police department before starting this work specifically because I knew you'd escalate. You just filed a false 911 report on camera, which I recorded, and lied to emergency dispatchers, which they recorded. Officer Mitchell, I'd like to file a formal complaint for harassment and false emergency reporting." Mitchell nodded slowly. "Ms. Torres, we'll take your statement. Ms. Whitmore, filing a false emergency report is a misdemeanor in this jurisdiction. Making false statements to 911 dispatchers diverts resources from actual emergencies. We're issuing you a citation." Linda's mouth fell open. "What? No. She's the one. You can't. I'm the victim here." Park's expression could have frozen water. "Ma'am, you're not the victim. You called 911 claiming an emergency that doesn't exist. That's a crime. You'll receive a citation and a court date. If you continue to harass Ms. Torres or interfere with her legal construction, we'll arrest you for obstruction. Am I clear?" Linda looked at Rebecca, rage and humiliation warring in her expression. "This isn't over. I'll sue you. I'll get a lawyer. Mitchell stepped between them. "Ms. Whitmore, stop talking. Go inside your house. Right now." Rebecca watched Linda retreat, shoulders shaking with fury, bathrobe trailing behind her like a defeated flag. Officer Mitchell turned back to Rebecca. "Ms. Torres, Sergeant Gonzalez briefed us this morning. She said if Linda Whitmore called 911 over your pool demolition, we should handle it as harassment. Smart move calling ahead." Rebecca smiled for the first time in months. "I build municipal water systems, officer. I understand infrastructure, documentation, and covering my bases. Thank you for your response." Park handed Rebecca her business card. "Call us directly if she escalates further. That citation she's getting? If she violates it, she'll spend a night in jail. Some people only learn through consequences." The officers returned to their cruisers, and Rebecca watched them drive away. Then she walked back to her yard, signaled to the demolition crew, and said simply, "Let's finish the job." The jackhammers roared back to life, and Rebecca watched Linda's curtains twitch frantically. She smiled, because justice, served in front of police witnesses, was particularly satisfying. The demolition took 3 days, and Linda was a ghost. No more confrontations, no more screaming, no more demands. Rebecca would occasionally see movement in Linda's windows, the shadow of a woman watching but no longer acting. The citation Officer Mitchell had issued was for $500 and included a mandatory court appearance. But Linda's silence wasn't surrender, it was calculation. Rebecca knew that because on day 4, when the pool cavity was being filled with engineered fill dirt, Linda's attorney sent a cease and desist letter claiming the demolition had damaged Linda's property foundation and demanding $25,000 in compensation. Rebecca read the letter in her kitchen, called her attorney Marcus Webb, and heard him laugh. She hired Donald Kramer, He's a personal injury ambulance chaser who takes any case if the client pays up front. This letter is legally meaningless. She has no engineering report, no damage assessment, no evidence. Ignore it and finish your project. Rebecca did exactly that. The pool was completely filled and graded within a week, and Rebecca hired a landscaping company to install sod, native plants, and a small patio area. What had been a source of stress was now a peaceful garden space. She'd lost the pool, but she'd gained something more valuable: the knowledge that she'd stood her ground against entitlement and won. The first twist came 3 weeks later when Rebecca received a call from Jim Caldwell, the HOA president. "Rebecca, I wanted to give you a heads up. Linda filed a complaint about your new landscaping, claiming it violates HOA guidelines. I rejected it immediately and informed her that any further frivolous complaints would result in fines against her for abuse of the complaint system. She's furious. But between you and me, 5 other neighbors have filed harassment complaints against her since your 911 incident. The board is discussing whether to pursue legal action to remove her from the community." Rebecca thanked him, but said she just wanted peace. Caldwell chuckled. "You've got it. Linda's learned that the HOA doesn't exist to enforce her personal preferences. She's been quiet since we threatened fines." The second twist was better. Rebecca was working in her front garden on a Saturday morning when her neighbor from across the street, Patricia Chen, walked over with a casserole. "I wanted to apologize. Several of us saw what Linda put you through and we didn't speak up. We thought if we stayed quiet, she'd leave us alone. But after she called the cops on you for legally demolishing your own pool, we realized she'd keep escalating until someone stopped her. 6 of us gave statements to your police friends about Linda's behavior toward various neighbors. Apparently she's got a court date next month, and the prosecutor is charging her with filing a false report." Rebecca accepted the casserole and Patricia's apology. "You didn't owe me anything, but I appreciate it now." The court date arrived on December 12th. Rebecca didn't attend. She'd provided her statement and evidence to the prosecutor, but Patricia texted her updates throughout the morning. Linda had shown up with her attorney, Kramer, who apparently tried to argue that Linda had reasonable belief that Rebecca's construction was illegal. The prosecutor played the 911 recording where Linda definitively stated there was no permit despite never checking. The judge was unimpressed. Linda was found guilty, sentenced to 30 days of suspended jail time, $750 in fines, 40 hours of community service, and a mandatory conflict resolution class. The judge also issued a restraining order prohibiting Linda from contacting Rebecca or entering Rebecca's property. Patricia's final text was, "Judge told Linda that weaponizing emergency services is indefensible and shows contempt for rule of law." Linda left crying. Her attorney looked disgusted. Rebecca stood in her backyard 2 months after demolition day, December sun warming her face, surveying her new garden space. The native plants were establishing nicely. The small patio had a comfortable bench where she could sit after work. The space felt peaceful in a way the pool never had, not because pools were stressful, but because Linda's harassment had poisoned what should have been joy. Rebecca had learned that sometimes reclaiming peace meant giving up something you loved. But she'd also learned that standing your ground, documenting everything, and refusing to be a victim could shift power completely. Linda's house went up for sale in January. Patricia told Rebecca that Linda couldn't handle being the neighborhood pariah after everyone testified about her behavior. Rebecca watched the moving truck arrive on a cold February morning and felt nothing. No triumph, no anger, just relief. A young couple with 2 small children bought the house 3 weeks later. And when they knocked on Rebecca's door to introduce themselves, they mentioned the previous owner had left a note warning them about the difficult neighbor next door. Rebecca laughed and invited them in for coffee, explaining exactly what had happened. They laughed too. "We did our research. Everyone in the neighborhood told us you were great and the previous owner was a nightmare. We're just glad she's gone. Rebecca Torres sat on her patio bench that evening, glass of wine in hand, watching the sunset paint her garden in gold and orange light. She'd lost a pool but gained a community. She'd been harassed for months but had documented everything and won. She'd been pushed to her breaking point but had refused to break. And most importantly, she'd learned that sometimes justice doesn't come from trying to reason with unreasonable people. Sometimes it comes from letting them overplay their hand while you prepare carefully, document meticulously, and wait patiently for them to destroy themselves. As Rebecca sat there in peace, surrounded by neighbors who'd become friends, she smiled. Because justice, served with police citations and restraining orders, was the most satisfying kind of all. Across the country in Portland, Oregon, retired federal prosecutor Catherine Walsh was trimming roses when her new neighbor informed her that the oak tree on Catherine's property blocked his solar panels and needed to be removed immediately. Catherine, who'd spent 30 years prosecuting property fraud cases, set down her shears and smiled. That tree was here 40 years before your solar panels. I pulled the property survey this morning when you mentioned this yesterday. Your panels are actually encroaching 6